Welcome to School's Out 80s Comedy Story Time.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of School's Out 80s Comedy Storytime. Got a special guest for us today, coming to us all the way from Austin, Texas, Chuck Greenwood. Say hello to everybody at School's Out 80s.
Hi everybody, school is out. No, it's back in, but we don't mind.
Hey Chuck, man, you have a great voice for vocal. I mean, I know we're going to tell everybody about a lot of your musical history and things like that, but isn't it true that you used to be a DJ?
Yeah, I worked as a musician. I picked up the guitar in '64 and started really actively gigging in '67 and had a band that we won the Houston Teenage Fair Battle of the Bands with about 100 other bands in it.
Wow.
In 1967, when we had reformed and had been together for about a month as a reformed previous version of our band, the Georgetown Medical Band. And it was very fortunate that that came about because it gave us a lot of notoriety overnight. And then I was the vocalist. I was the lead vocalist, and somehow inherited the position of being very meticulous in the music. I had recruited a good friend who is an excellent musician through a series of events that got him in the band, and he was great musician wise, and he was a very good asset for me as far as the music side of it. And then we just took off. He had to switch to bass because we dropped the bass player, and he just picked it up overnight. He just took off. So we had a very good band, and then we had a couple of guys asked to join the band, and we immediately replaced the keyboard player and the guitar player, which was a blow to them. But we stepped up a huge notch, and then we really did very, very well pretty quickly. It was very quick.
Okay.
Then I was the vocalist, so of course I became the front man, and I heard tapes of myself and had a very rushed delivery that was hard to understand.
Yeah.
So I picked up on that from hearing playbacks. When I would announce the band, I would really rush it. So I started modulating my announcing. So then after about 15 years, we took off in '67, and I pretty much wound down after a succession of multiple bands, mostly at the end doing covers and traveling quite a bit, and just wanted to get out of that, and ended up getting opportunities to DJ in nightclubs.
Yes.
So I did that from about '81 to '96 was my last year. '95 was my last full year. So I DJed for about 15 years in local nightclubs. Mostly it was the effect of the urban cowboy craze.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Came and went. And then a lot of nightclubs opened with that theme where they did the country music rotation, and then had a break with the rock, pop, and soul that people dance to. And so we'd go through a cycle of country dance music. From slow to fast, basically, and then do a rock segment, dance segment. It was all dance music, and then drop back down and do a pop, slow song or two-step.
Yeah.
To the end where I had trained a guy, and then I said, okay, after 2 weeks, I said, you're good to go. And he said, well, I hate to tell you, but I was hired by the club down the street that you used to work for, but they said they couldn't put me on But if I came down to the club you're working at and got a job with y'all and got trained by you, we will hire you. So I got them all trained, format and the whole bit, song list and everything. And he said, so I'm going down the street to work where you used to work. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Well, that'll happen because it's a small world out there, right?
Yeah, and I moved around a lot. I read a book by Kenny Rogers that employed that strategy of get the clubs to compete with each other for your talent.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's intriguing. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to that the people that are in demand are the people that make themselves in demand.
Well, it pretty much happened because I did a good job.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a grand strategy on my part, but that's what ended up happening. Is I'd be working one place and other people would be trying to hire me all the time. And then when it'd go south where I was working, I'd go to the other people and say, okay, I'm ready to come over, you know.
Sure.
That happened multiple times. So I did that for about 15 years.
Okay.
And then got to the point where I said, well, I've got to look at my future and, you know, I need some benefits and health insurance and
sure.
You know, cash isn't going to cut it in the long run. You gotta get those benefits. So I ended up with the state. I retired from the state at the Texas Workforce Commission, work with unemployment.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's fantastic, Chuck. I mean, you definitely have done it right.
Definitely what?
You definitely have done it. You definitely have done it right because you got to both live your dream. It sounds like at some point you expanded your vision into becoming a DJ, like using the talents that you used on stage. You're able to use those same talents in a lucrative manner where you weren't so reliant on other people. Like when you're in a band, you're relying on other people.
Exactly. And, that was huge. The other people thing.
There you go. I used to have a co-host. What's that?
I'd go to work and it was me, and I didn't have to worry about the drummer needing to move off somewhere else with his girlfriend or something.
There you go. I have some friends of mine, and sometimes they're musicians and they have full bands and they love their full bands, but what they also really like is doing acoustic sets when it's just like them and a guitar player. And so instead of splitting the money 4 ways, you split the money 2 ways, and you only have to worry about, you know, you and the other guy showing up versus you know, if and when somebody else might or might not show up.
Well, that was the hardest part about it. And then over time, some people asked me to help them kind of in a consulting, in a consulting format. I don't know how to phrase it, but they wanted me to help them with making decisions about bands. And so they were getting my advice. And so I got involved in how bands were operating.
Okay.
I saw, you know, they would say, well, what about this band? What about that band? So I knew a lot of the musicians and would give them a heads up on who I thought was the best prospects for long term. And then as I learned the bands, it was the same stories over and over and over again. And I said, oh my God, everybody's doing this. You know, the times that I was going through it, everybody else. And then now that I've read all these stories about the more successful bands, most of them had a huge turnover. And Leonard Skinner, you know, there's nobody left in Leonard Skinner, and they're still going.
Right. No, you're absolutely correct. Multiple reasons why isn't that many people left in Leonard Skinner. One of them's a plane wreck.
Yeah, that was tragic. I was really getting into them when that happened.
Yeah.
I wasn't that into them early on, and then as friends of mine kept bugging me about them, and I'd listen to them more. I was like, wow, you know, I focused on the stuff that I liked most of the times, and I'd be down my own rabbit hole, and then I'd pop up and look around and go, man, I don't even know what's going on, you know. So most of the time I was obsessed with one genre or one style or another.
Sure.
And then wasn't really keeping up with anything other than what came on the radio. And then
sure.
became a DJ, it broadened my scope of people's interest in music and what was popular, and stuff that I had just had go by me for years and years, all of a sudden really seemed to be relevant. And
Absolutely.
I
Hey,
had a much
mhm,
better insight into what was going on.
sure, sure. Hey,
I had
Chuck.
tunnel vision. I
Uh-huh.
had tunnel vision for years and years.
Sure, sure. Hey, Chuck, my listeners, I know, I mean, you have some amazing stories. I don't want to give them away, but your stories, I mean, for me, like I consider myself a rock and roll historian. Like, I don't know even some of my musician friends. I bet I know more history about like rock music than a lot of my musician friends because I'm in business and I get bored. And so
Yeah.
I know I've read over 100 biographies, and
Wow.
I can't tell you how many documentaries that I've watched because I don't know. I don't really keep track of them. I can tell people like when you think about like a subject matter, I can tell you how many books I've read on the one subject matter, but I literally can't tell you even how many books I've read on the Beatles. I think
Yeah.
it's probably 16, but I
Yeah.
honestly don't know, and I also don't know how many documentaries that I've watched. But the one story I want you to tell, and I'm going to give you complete room to tell this, but I'm hoping you can tell it from like an emotional standpoint. So when we were on the cruise ship and you and I first met, you told me a story about a really famous, soulful person from the late '60s,
Oh yeah.
and many people have had no opportunity to meet this individual because they died at such a young
Yeah.
age. But if you could just walk us through not only like your meeting, your interaction, just the whole story, and two, like your journey, like because what you had to do to meet this individual. And
Yeah.
I'm
It
just gonna
was.
be quiet.
It was. Basically, the backstory is there was a guy named Floyd, this black guy that wore real colorful shirts, and
Okay.
used to come to all the concerts, or at least most of the concerts I went to. And
Yeah.
then somewhere in the middle of the concert, he'd come dancing out on the stage, and the musicians knew him, so they
Uh-huh.
welcomed him on stage, and he'd boogie around for about a song and a half. And
Okay.
when he would walk out, kind of, boogieing a little bit,
Uh-huh.
everybody'd yell, Floyd, Floyd. And it was hilarious, man. So
Yeah.
uh, he kind of sought us out because he hung around the bands quite a bit, and
Yeah.
would get to know us. And so one time I said, man, I've seen you in about 8 concerts, and you come dancing out. I said, how do you do that? What do you do to get that going on? And he said,
Yeah.
well, come with me and I'll show you how I do it. And I said,
Okay.
okay. So he said, well, let's go to this concert. And I said, well, okay, what do we do? And he says, I don't know till we get there. He says, I really don't know. So,
Okay. All right.
so, so we get there, and it's, I knew what it was, but I'm kind of holding it back for the shock factor. But it's
Yeah.
at Gregory Gymnasium on the UT campus, and
In Austin, right?
yeah, in Austin, and it's where
Yeah.
they had a lot of shows
University of
there.
Texas.
So Gregory Gymnasium, and we're walking around the building, and it's fairly early,
Right.
and he says, okay, I think we can get in right here. I said, really? I said, there's this wall and some windows. And he says, we can go
Uh-huh.
up this drain pipe. And it was this big, thick, round rain gutter coming down from the roof.
Yeah.
And I said, well, okay. So he goes up. And I said, okay. And I go behind him, and it's sturdy enough that I feel pretty confident. It's got this black coating, got a little bit of that on my hands. And
Man, so
we
you were shimmying up a drain pipe?
we didn't shimmy. We held on and kind of walked up. And it was sturdy
Really?
enough to where it wasn't like wobbling or anything. And at first I was like, oh no, but I watched him go up, and then I followed him. And then he
Okay.
crawls in this window, which was open. Everything was open back then. There was no
Uh-huh.
screens or anything, and the windows are open. So then I kind of lean over, and it wasn't hard at all. It was
Right.
second story maybe. So then we're walking around in the back at Gregory Gymnasium, where they had a lot of athletic events, UT basketball games mostly, and
Sure.
concerts. So we're walking around, and it's mostly bare bones, concrete rooms with, concrete block rooms with concrete floors. And we come around the corner and walk into this one room, no doors, just concrete block door. And we walk in, and sitting on a folding chair is this woman dressed really wild. And we look at her, and it's Janis
Can you
Joplin.
remember what she was wearing?
It was one of those boas that she always wore, wrapped around her neck and flowing down.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like a pink boa.
Some kind of hair thing in her hair, like looked like flowers or something.
Yeah.
And real flowing dress. And she was sitting on that chair, and she had a bottle sitting next to her, and it was, I'm sure, Southern Comfort. So we walk in, and it's just the two of us, and there's nobody else around. So we walk in, and it's like, whoops. And she smiles real big and says, "Oh, hi, how y'all doing?" You know, and Floyd goes, "Oh, hi." And we're looking at each other, and goes, I'm like, "Oh, hi. Well, I guess we need to go now." And he and I boogied out of there and went around the corner and slid down the hall. And he went, "Oh, wow, that was unbelievable." So then he works his way. He knows the place pretty good around. And we got on the stage in the wings, on the side of the stage from the band. And the wings are where you can't see the people that are standing in the wings, so to speak, curtains that are hanging where you can't see from the stage unless you're way off to the side. And so we're standing there watching the band get started. And as the band gets started, she pops up right next to us and starts dancing like a maniac and yelling and screaming and stomping her feet. "Go, go, get it, you know." And so we're dancing with her kind of, and she's looking at us and laughing and jumping around. And then at the appointed time, man, she blasts out across the stage, runs across the stage, and grabs the microphone and just explodes. And I wasn't a real big Janis Joplin fan because friends of mine just wore the record out on me, you know. And so I was like, okay, enough. And then when I saw her live, man, I became a super fan. It was like, oh my God, now I get it, you know. So we stood over there, and at the appointed time, I don't know how he knew when, that he goes dancing out and dances in front of the crowd, and you, Floyd.
Really? Oh my God, that's hilarious.
And he's dancing around out there with his multicolored psychedelic pop-off shirt, and comes dancing back, and he wore these round period glasses that are just, you know, would date the time if you just took one look at the guy. And it's like,
so you mean like, were his glasses, Chuck, were they like John Lennon shades or something? Or
well,
Janis
they were
Joplin
round
shades?
and very late 60s. He was very stylish.
Okay.
And just had a really cool look, you know. So that was our adventure, to go sneak in and see Janis Joplin. And we didn't get thrown out. He got to do his dance out on the stage thing. So then we left and just were floating, man. It was so fun. It was like, wow, man. So that's how you do it. He says, yeah, it's never the same. I'll usually figure it out when I get there, you know.
That's hilarious. So did you guys have tickets to that concert?
No, that was what was so amazing. Is he said, well, I got one picked out we should go to. And then, you know, it was, I don't know how far out, maybe 4 or 5 days, maybe longer. I can't remember how long. And
yeah.
It was her big return to Texas. She had been at UT and was in the folk scene, played out of Threadgills, and was really involved in that. And then so she was, you know, a struggling musician, singer in Austin. Then she left, and that was her concert where it was her big triumphant return to Austin. So she was totally stoked. She was just so ready to go out there for her home crowd, where she started her music professional debut was at a little folk club out in North Austin. And she sang with a bunch of different people over a period of years. And then went out to San Francisco and caught on with the scene out there immediately.
Yeah. She's such a big voice. Have you ever heard the story, Chuck, of how Janis Joplin discovered she could sing like in front of people?
I think I did, but I can't remember it.
Yeah, no worries. So, so her and a bunch of her guy friends, they used to sneak out because she grew up in Port Arthur, Texas.
Yeah.
And so they just used to sneak over to Louisiana. And sometimes too, I think they sneak over to Austin. But early on, I think they were sneaking over to Louisiana to drink. And they would give her free beer if she would get up and sing.
Oh, really?
So initially, what's
I had
that?
not heard that. I had not
Yes,
heard that.
yeah. So initially, it was for a free beer. Why she even got up and sang the first time.
Oh, well, that's cool. That's really interesting. That's
What people will do for beer, Chuck.
I've unfortunately, as a singer, I was not able to partake in all the free beer that was available. But
Oh yeah, no, I understand. I just think it's hilarious, particularly like if you ever hear her interviewed back in the day, and they
yeah,
ask her like, "Whatever made you get up and think you could sing?" and she'll say it. She'll be like, "Well, I used to go out with some of the boys, and we used to go to the bars together, and they told me they'd give me a free beer if I'd get up on stage and sing, and they had me at that."
man, and that's when beer was 35 cents.
Yeah, I know. I know. All good. No, but that was a great story. So,
Well, I hope I
yeah,
did it. I hope I did it justice.
no, you did it great, man. I love the way you said it. So, so hey, I got a question because I think like back in the day, you growing up in Austin, I'm thinking you were probably there when Stevie Ray Vaughan moved out of Dallas to Austin to try to make it in the music scene.
Yeah, actually, I moved to Austin at 64 with my parents and family, and went to high school. Graduated from high school in Austin, and that was my.
Okay,
And then I went out to school in New Mexico, and then came back and went to school in Georgetown at Southwestern, and then
sure.
came back to Austin to UT in '67. And I was
Okay.
here when Stevie came down, and I had seen him around and knew who he was. There was a group called the
Uh-huh.
Cobras. It was one of the bands he ended up in, and I really, really liked the Cobras. And then they had these stories. He joined a band called the Cobras. He
Yeah.
joined also a band called Crackerjack, which had the rhythm section from Johnny Winter, who had left his own band and went off with Rick Derringer.
Oh,
But
wow.
the bass player Tommy Shannon and drummer Uncle John Turner ended up in this band called Crackerjack, and then they went through a succession of guitar players, and Stevie was one of them.
Is
And
Johnny Winter, is he from Austin?
no, he was from the Beaumont area. I'm not sure exactly, Port
I
Arthur,
didn't know he
Beaumont.
was a Texas guy. Okay.
Yeah, and his brother Edgar, and
Wow. I had no
he's
idea.
he's a guy who was recorded by a guy who recorded a lot of bands around Austin, and it was Bill Josie, and his record company was called Sonobeat, and he recorded Johnny Winter, and it was his most successful project. It got picked up by Liberty Records.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was recorded in my band, Georgetown Medical Band, and also a group called Paul Rabbit by Bill
Mhm.
Josie. And then another guy that was recorded by Bill Josie in a group called Mariani was Eric Johnson. And I've got a pretty good little story about those guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
Eric is just a phenomenal player and took years and years and years. And then it ended up, he actually practiced in our practice place with the drummer Mariani when they had a group. And Eric was the lights out kid guitar player. And we had a practice place that we shared with another band called the Strawberry Shoemaker, and it was down on
Mhm.
First Street.
Yes.
And they knew Vince Mariani from high school, and he wanted to practice at our place. And they said, sure, So they were always set up, and they were in there. All they did is practice, man. They didn't do hardly any gigs. And they did a couple of opening gigs for big acts. But Bill Josie really worked to get something going with them. And they did some pretty good recordings that Johnny Winter was the one who had the real success. But
Yes.
the reason I bring up Eric Johnson is I knew him from when he was pretty young, and he actually ended up, I read joining a band that I had left called Paul Rabbit. He joined them briefly, which I would believe because Paul Rabbit had Mariani's bass player at that point, and I had left the band. And they said Eric Johnson was briefly in that band, but Eric had a succession of bands. He joined a band, some guys from San Marcos called the Electromagnets, and that's where he got his first real big exposure, is the jazz fusion thing. And
okay.
They were excellent. So he went for years before, he really did well in the 90s, got some Grammys and stuff, and just had some excellent recordings. And that was
think about that. Like, he started in 69 and didn't really start like hitting until 90.
He was practicing at our practice place in 67 and 68. He was playing with Mariani. It was a pretty high-powered bunch. And then he played with the Electromagnets in the 70s. He actually stayed with us. I had a band I was with in Dallas in 75, and there was a guy in the band that was exceptionally good guitarist named Thurston, and they had grown up together. They didn't live but a short distance apart and knew each other from when they were kids, and they grew up learning guitar together. So Thurston said, "We'll stay with us." So Eric Johnson actually stayed with us when they had a gig in Dallas one time. But getting back to Stevie Ray, the reason I've gone through that loop is because I want to definitely emphasize Eric Johnson, who's going out with Joe Satriani's putting back together the original G3, which was a guitar supergroup with Steve Vai and Eric Johnson. So I just read they're going out again in the spring. So those three guys will be hooked up. And that'll be a powerhouse show for sure. But the story
when is that?
G3 is the name of a group that Joe Satriani had. And the original group was, I think it was 12, 13 years ago. I saw them. And it was Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, who had actually been Joe Satriani's guitar teacher at one point, and Eric Johnson. So those three guys played a series of shows, and I got to see them, and it was fantastic. Well, Satriani's done that, I believe, annually, and so this year he announced he's going to go back out with the original G3, which is Steve Vai and Eric Johnson, and of course himself. But the loop around to the story is I want to give some background on Eric. Who's just a fantastic, incredible guitar player, and has all these endorsements and has music lessons online, and just phenomenal talent, exceptionally dedicated musician. He's worked for everything he has. In the extreme, just was in the practice place nonstop. That's all.
And that's Eric Johnson we're speaking of.
Yeah, and then he ended up going with my sister. I have three sisters. And he ended up dating and then going with my sister for a number of years actually, and she knew Stevie Ray Vaughan. She met him and knew him. And Eric had a birthday party, and I was invited to his birthday party at his dad's house. He stayed at his dad's house forever. His dad was single and was a doctor, and really supported Eric through the years. And so I went to Eric's birthday party and visited for a little while. They were always really low-key affairs. He wasn't a typical wild man of any. He would refer to songs instead of our next song will be. He would say our next piece is. And it was like, our next piece, man. What is this? A classical concert? Well, he was classically trained.
Right.
He started out on piano, classical before he switched to guitar.
He was a classically. He's still alive. He's 69, so he's a classically trained musician.
He learned piano, and his first musical experiences were classical. And then when he picked up the guitar, I'm sure he had the musical background from classical training that it came easier to him. I know he was just phenomenal overnight. But,
so you know who his historical background in music aligns itself with?
Eric Johnson's?
Yes.
No, I know he's a huge fan of most of the heavy guitarists, including Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton. He played all that stuff back then.
Well, no, the thing I was just going to mention, since he was classically trained as a pianist, is so Eddie Van Halen's father and mother were from Holland.
Yeah, yeah.
And Eddie, as a young child, was made to practice piano. In fact, he won several piano contests in Pasadena, California. And
I did not know that.
And what's interesting is that Eddie says that he never learned how to read music.
Most of those guys didn't, man.
And yeah, he never learned. I mean, I find that hard to believe that he never learned how to use, because when you're working with a piano teacher like he used to have to, like
I would think that he would read music.
Yeah, I don't think I believe that. Like, there are other famous people that say the same thing, and it gets a lot of shock value in the guitar magazines back in the day. But I don't think I believe it.
I read he had a set of drums and ended up giving them to his brother. So his brother took up the drums, and then he picked up.
That's a true story, yeah.
Then he picked up the guitar.
Well, so the way it went is his parents bought him a set of drums, and the only real job he ever had his entire life, other than being a musician, was delivering newspapers.
All right.
So he was a newspaper boy. So his parents bought him a set of drums and bought Alex Van Halen a guitar. And one night, really? Alex was out on a date. Eddie took his guitar, and by the time Alex got back from his date, Alex just got frustrated because Eddie played his guitar better than he did immediately.
He probably had already modified it too.
I know. It's just kind of wild. But like Eric Johnson, he really aligns himself with Eddie Van Halen's background. So I want to understand, because I'm just a huge music buff for history. How does Eric Johnson relate to Stevie Ray?
Well, that's what I was trying to get back to. Is
okay.
I was at Eric Johnson's birthday party.
Yes.
And then it was pretty early in the evening, and I said, well, I'm going to take off. And he says, well, I'll walk you out. So he walked me out himself, and we're walking across his front yard.
Okay.
And this guy comes out of the shadows. It was starting to get dark, and walks up, and it's Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Oh, no way. Oh, my God. That gives me chills.
So I recognized him, and my sister had invited Stevie to the party.
Okay.
So they had never met. It's my understanding, according to my sister, and I could be wrong. It's been a long time, but it was my understanding they had never met, and my sister wanted them to meet, so she invited Stevie Ray to Eric's birthday party. So when he walked up and introduced himself, he was introducing himself to Eric, and Eric was introducing himself to Stevie, and then Eric introduced me to Stevie, and I had been around him before, but not really introduced like that. So we stood there and chit-chatted for a few minutes, and then Eric said, well, let's go on back in the party. And I was already leaving.
Yeah.
So I thought this would be a little awkward, but I just really wanted to go back into the party, but I didn't want to be like hanging over those guys' shoulders just to hear what they were going to say to each other,
Sure.
And, I've got another little.
Hey, just real quick, Chuck, I wanted to expand a little bit on Stevie Ray. So when was the first time you got to hear Stevie Ray play? And when you did hear him play the first time, did you think to yourself, this guy's going to be world famous? Or did you think that, he's just another guitarist in Austin?
No, I saw him with the Cobras, and I think I saw him a number of times, but the Cobras stood out the most because they were the most high-powered band. I did not catch him with Crackerjack. And
was he playing lead then?
Yeah, he switched off with a guy named Denny Freeman, who was the guitarist.
Okay.
And continued to be the guitarist through the duration of the Cobras. And they were a rhythm and blues band. And so Stevie was with them briefly. And then he ended up, had a couple of his own bands. One was called Triple Threat with Lou Ann Barton, the singer. and W.C. Clark, the bass player, who was real well known around Austin, and is kind of considered the godfather of the Austin blues scene. And he's the uncle of Gary Clark Jr. But Stevie then ended up, Tommy Shannon had played with Stevie in Cracker Jack. And then it evolved to where Tommy Shannon just said, I got to play with that guy. And some of the stories I've read, it's like they never met before. Tommy Shannon walked up and said, I've got to be in your band. I want to be in your band. And so he had played with Johnny Winter and was an excellent bassist. And so it was very quickly after that Tommy Shannon became a part of Stevie Ray's Double Trouble.
Oh, really? Okay. That's a good story.
That's the formation of Double Trouble. Is Tommy Shannon just said, I've got to be in your band. I've got to play with you.
Wow. I love Stevie Ray Vaughan. So was there a point in time where like you were watching Stevie Ray and the Cobras or one of his other bands like Cracker Jack, and you just said to yourself, oh my God, that guy's going all the way, or were you still like, I mean,
he stood out. He stood out. It was just kind of like Hendrix. I would hear a recording that Hendrix was on that he did before the Hendrix Experience. He played on tons of recordings. Yeah. And he just stands out. You know, I recognize him through his style. I usually have a heads up that he's on the recording. But then Stevie just stood out. And it was just like, oh my God, he's doing what I think I want to try to do, you know? Not that I'm doing, but what I wished I could do. And just loved what he was doing. And then it evolved, and he went through a succession of lineups. And then when he got with Double Trouble, he added a guitar player, Derek O'Brien, who was the guitar player for the house band at Antone's. He actually joined our band when we were out on the road at the request of our bass player, who had been in Antone's house band. And Derek is the only guitarist to ever play with Stevie Ray after the, Double Trouble got started. He asked Derek O'Brien to go along with him. But other than that, it was just a three-piece. Yeah. And then they took off traveling and working. They had an attorney, talent agents, and a lot of people behind them. They had some backing, and they just worked and nonstop, just kept going and going and going, and had a lot of opportunities. They auditioned for the Rolling Stones. Oh, wow. And Mick Jagger was going to produce them, but they didn't pass the audition. Mick Jagger says, everybody was shocked. Like he said, the blues don't sell, Oh, really? So he took a pass on them. Stevie Ray Vaughan played Monterey Jazz Festival. And this friend of mine that I was working with at the time, Pat Whitefield, the bass player, came real excited to me and said, man, Stevie Ray just tore it up at Montreux. I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah. Well, David Bowie was in the audience. And David Bowie ended up offering Stevie Ray a job in his band. So Stevie played on David Bowie's Let's Dance, and I believe China Girl, and he was set up to be on the tour. David Bowie asked Stevie Ray to come work with him, and Stevie committed for a year. He said, well, I've got a band, and I want to do my band, and I want to promote our recordings. And so David Bowie said, yeah, sure. Well, out of happenstance, I happened to work with a guy at the Texas Workforce Commission that worked for Showco, which was a big show production company. And he was working with David Bowie at the time. And he said he was there when the guys came out, and he did this English accent of, pull Stevie's rig off the truck, And he's like, what? So they pulled Stevie's gear off the truck, and the band took off, and Stevie Ray was just left, what? And then I read that Stevie held back for years and years, but then finally he said, it was all bullshit. He said that I could open for David Bowie with my band, and then I could actively promote my music. And then at the last second, David Bowie changed his mind and reneged. And he never spoke to Stevie.
Oh,
They just
wow.
pulled his stuff off the truck. And my coworker was there. He said, man, it was unreal. We were like, what? So we pulled Stevie's stuff
Wow.
off the truck, and Stevie said, okay, and came back to Austin. And I don't know if you know this, but Stevie was really working hard and trying to get his foot in the door. And of all people, Jackson Browne offered to have Double Trouble, Stevie Ray, record in his own personal studio. So they said, okay, and they took him up on it. So they show up at Jackson Browne's studio. And so Jackson says, okay, we'll make this recording, And he says, well, where's the tape? Jackson Browne's expected them to bring tape to the recording session because that's how they did it. And they said, well, we don't have any tape. He says, oh, y'all don't have any tape? And they said, no, we didn't know we were supposed to go out and buy tape, which is very expensive, and bring it to the session. He says, that's okay. I've got a bunch of tapes that we can overdub and just overdub my music with your recording. So they did pretty much a live session recording in the studio. They could all hear each other and just played their set. And they had pretty much a standard set they played at that point, including several of his songs and a bunch of covers. But that was Texas Flood. And then John Hammond caught wind of that and heard Stevie and decided to jump in and promote Stevie. And that was the beginning of Stevie's Double Trouble career, which was the Texas Flood record.
Man, that is one of my favorite records ever. So, hey, quick question, Chuck. So did you get to hang out and drink beers with Stevie Ray Vaughan back in the day?
No, not at all. It was more of a come and go social situation. It wasn't like a hangout situation. And truthfully, a lot of those guys, most of them were heavy into the harder stuff. And I was dealing with lots of people that were having behavioral issues that I was getting completely burned out on the behavior. And I kept telling people, I said, I don't care what you do, but I won't tolerate, the behavior. So it's kind of like Lonesome Dove. I can't stand rude behavior in a man,
Right. No,
so I was just not around that. And then he was into a lot of that, but I was around quite a bit. My parents had a swimming pool. And one day I was coming out of my parents' house up on the hills in Austin. And as I was coming out of the house, getting ready to leave, my sister comes busting through the door with Stevie Ray and a very good bass player, Roscoe Beck. Outstanding bass player, was the band director for Leonard Cohen for years. But they come busting through the door, giggling like little kids, man. And Stevie had this serpent. He had a cobra tattooed on his chest. So he had this towel over him. And my sister said, oh, Steve was scared to death my mom was going to see his tattoo. Well, my mom got to hear Stevie Ray, and she got to hear Eric Johnson played for my parents at our house. And she asked me one time, she says, why is Stevie so popular and Eric's just not that popular? I said, well, Mom, most people would rather go to a party than to a concert. And Eric plays concerts, and Stevie plays parties. So that's the difference. That's the difference is the low down blues bar get down or, a recital. Eric was more like a recital. So I said, that's the difference, Well, then Eric came into his own, and I got to throw this in. Joe Bonamassa recently said, I feel obligated to apologize to Eric Johnson every time I run into him. And he said, man, I'm sorry I stole your style. So he gives total props to Eric Johnson for his
wow.
play. Yeah. And he said that recently, that he was embarrassed. I don't know so much embarrassed, but he said he apologized to Eric Johnson every time he ran into him, that he felt obligated to. So that's the kind of influence that Eric Johnson has had on people.
Man,
just fabulous, man, and a wonderful, wonderful guy.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of inspiration when you study Eric Johnson's. I'm sitting here, I'm online right now looking at his career, and
yeah,
and according to the information that I'm seeing on Eric, I mean, he literally got involved in the music business. It looks like in the late '60s. Does that sound right?
yeah, yeah. He was with Mariani, who
Mm-hmm.
was the fantastic drummer. I moved down from the Cleveland area.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in Indianapolis briefly, but
Yes.
we were basically in a suburb, Rocky River, outside of Cleveland. And I had
Mm-hmm.
all these activities, and I thought, I'd like to learn how to play the guitar. That was before the Beatles, and we moved to Indianapolis, and I had nothing to do. So I told my parents I wanted to get a guitar, and then my
Right.
mom took me to guitar lessons. We couldn't walk anywhere where we lived in Indianapolis. Then my parents decided they didn't like it, and my dad had an offer in Austin, so we came down to Austin
Oh,
and thought
okay.
it was a total drag, man. And my cousin and I went to this thing that was advertised on the radio. The first time we went, it was a National Guard armory that we couldn't find. It was kind of hidden away on Camp Mabry behind this
Uh-huh.
neighborhood. So we walked around and couldn't find it. So then we found out where it was. It was National Guard Armory, and we went in, and there was a band that was playing that was really, really good. The guitar player
Mm-hmm.
was great. And my cousin and I looked at each other. It was called Butch Yant and the Deeds, and there was a guitar
Mm-hmm.
player named Johnny Richardson and a drummer named Rusty Weir
Mm-hmm.
that figured heavily in the Austin scene for a long time. And we walked in on that gig, and they were excellent. And so he and I just looked at each other and went, "Wow, this place is cool." That was the summer of '64 when we first moved here. His
Oh,
dad
wow.
worked. My dad hired him, and then he came down with an insurance agency, and they told him he could pick whoever he wanted to come down with him. And
Uh-huh.
so we asked my uncle to come down, and of course, therefore, my cousin, who was 6 months younger than me, and his younger brother and sister all moved down at the same time we did in 1964, early July. So we thought Austin was Nowheresville, and then stumbled into this National Guard Armory and saw this band that just blew us away.
Oh,
But
wow.
that was the first exposure to the Austin musicians. And
Sure.
then when I started high school, I ended up running around with some guys who played, and I was just learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually played. They said, let's play the talent show at the high school,
Uh-huh.
and I said, "Oh, cool." Well, we got together and practiced, and my parents actually said, "Well, you can practice here." So these guys drug their gear into my parents' living room,
Uh-huh.
and it was several friends, and then they said, "Okay, well, we know this guy, and we're going to pay him to play with us. His name's Johnny Richardson." I went, "Oh, I know that guy." So he shows up at my parents' house and plays with us to rehearse for this talent show. And so we go to school and set our stuff up, and all the kids come into the gym, and we play the talent show. And then what they told me later is they said, "Man, we didn't tell you, but Benny, the bass player, kept going back and turning your amp down, man."
Okay. Oh
And
no, man, getting dissed by the bass player. Oh no.
I was wearing these wraparound sunglasses and was really cool, and I'm rocking out, and they were going back there turning me down. And the
Hey,
other guitar player
that's
was really
okay.
good, and they recruited this guy who was really good on the drums, and Benny was a good bass player, and then Johnny Richardson was just a fabulous lead guitar player. So we
Sure.
blew it out at high school, and
That's
played
awesome.
the well, it wasn't really a talent show. It was, I don't know what they called it, but that's basically what it was. Is kids got up and did their thing,
Hey, that's real similar. Your story about the talent show is real
Yeah.
similar to how Vincent Fernier started out in music. His group,
Who's
uh,
that?
Vincent Fernier. He
Okay.
started out in like the Phoenix, Arizona area,
Okay.
and when he and his friends got up, uh, they were doing like a Dead Beatles rendition or whatever, where they
Yeah.
just got up and they did Beatles songs, but they didn't even really have instruments. They just used like tennis rackets, and it was
Crazy.
and but you know who they became?
No, I don't.
the Alice Cooper band. So,
Oh, wow, man.
so Vincent Vernier is the real name of Alice Cooper.
Oh, I didn't know that. I've
Yeah.
seen him because a friend drugged me to it. Um, Basically, he's more knowledgeable about music and bands than I am. He
Oh
did.
yeah, no worries. But hey, back to Eric Johnson though. Like people need to hear this because I think it gives like people that struggle in life some inspiration. Because I'm a motivational speaker,
Yeah.
Chuck. But so the fact that Eric Johnson started in the late '60s and he got a Grammy nomination in '86 and he won his first Grammy in 1991. That is somebody who is staying focused on their vision. And
He was phenomenal from the get-go.
Yeah.
He was incredible, and then he could nail Clapton note for note, and he did he was fascinated with Hendrix, did a lot of Hendrix.
Sure.
And that's where my interests were. So I just loved Eric, and he was a phenomenal guy to be around. And then
I'm gonna go listen to his music this week. I'm gonna go listen to his music. Hey, I want to take this in just a tad bit more direction, more focused on like more on your experience, Chuck.
Okay.
So like at some point you had told me a story about you driving in a car, I think from Dallas to Austin with an ultra famous person. Who was that?
I'm not sure.
If not, I mean, I can remind you what you had told me, but you told me that you spent some time in the car with Don Henley.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that wasn't exactly what happened.
Okay.
The drummer actually, the first time I met Don Henley, we were playing the Austin Battle of the Bands, and it happened to be a week before we won the Houston Battle of the Bands. So it was really ironic because he was standing off stage in the wings and intently staring at me.
Yes.
And, we had a better PA than most people. So the people in the Battle of the Bands, we let them use our PA, and we were running around doing roadie work for every other band that played. We dragged stuff off stage and helped them set up. So we did our set, and we were really, really tight. And then our drummer was pretty good, so Henley might have been really studying him. So after the show, Don came up to me, and he started giving me advice. I said,
okay.
Yeah, okay. And I knew who he was.
Yeah.
And he starts telling me, says, well, you shouldn't play Battles of the Band. I said, okay. And he said, the reason is it'll hurt your price. He said, as a professional band, you can charge as much as you can get, but you're more of an amateur band if you're in the Battle of the Bands, and you're going to be ranked according to your rank in the Battle of the Bands. So we got like 4th or 5th place, which we were pretty disappointed.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, but we were a brand new band, and it was like we were disappointed because there were bands that I talked to the people that are doing the show, and I said, man, I don't know why we didn't do better. And he said, well, we've got to promote the baby bands. If we don't promote the baby bands, then they'll get discouraged and won't sign up. And it's a community thing. So we really need to get them involved. And I said, well, okay, but it really hurts us to get ranked down at 4 or 5, you know. And then
was Don Henley, when you met him, was he already in the Eagles?
In that era, he was coming down to Austin with a band called Felicity. Okay. And he was playing with Richard Bowden and a couple other guys, and they played the same circuit we did pretty much.
Oh, wow.
And to finish that story, when he approached me, we got to talking to him and said, well, why don't you come on over to our house? We lived in South Austin. We had a band house. So he and his band got in their van and followed us down to our house and hung out with us at our house for a little while. So got to visit with him and Richard Bowden. Then I would go to their gigs and end up talking to Richard a lot because he was really into equipment, as was I. And then we'd go to these jam sessions and they'd show up. And there was this lady, Maggie Cowart. Everybody knew Maggie was a go-go dancer and was extremely popular. Everybody knew her. And she knew everybody. And she told me, she said, Don Henley, everybody says that he's got a very commercial voice and he's really going to do well. And so I totally, absolutely agree, but we'd go to their gigs and these jam sessions and stuff. And there was a point where a couple years later, I worked with Gary P. Nunn in the Georgetown Medical Band. And we were going to go to the Louisville International Pop Festival. So that was 69. When I met Don Henley was 67, summer of 67.
Oh, wow. You met him early. Was he not? He was just, and he's from Texas originally. And isn't he from like East Texas?
Linden, Texas. And he was a student at North Texas University.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And was an English literature major. So he went to school up there, and him and his band came down to Austin because Austin had a very strong fraternity party scene. And there was a local agent that booked a lot of those parties. And so we ended up playing the same circuits and the same clubs. So Gary P. Nunn and Rick Cobb were in the Georgetown Medical Band. Gary P. Nunn's the one who asked to join the band in fall of 67. So we were very close. He took off to California and joined a band out there. And then when he came back, joined another band, and we were still close friends. But we schemed to go up to the Louisville International Pop Festival, and we're going to go up in my van. And then our friend Rick Cobb had moved up to Lake Worth and was working with Blood Rock.
Okay.
So he said, well, y'all come up and hang with me, and we'll go to Louisville. So just come up to my place, and then we'll navigate out to the Pop Festival. So we said, okay. So Gary and I drive up there in my van to Dallas, actually Lake Worth, where Rick lived.
Yeah.
And he says, well, you don't mind if we take another guy along? I said, oh, no, man, no problem at all. So he says, okay. And it was Don Henley. So we all pile into my van. And one of the funny things is I had this Boy Scout backpack that I had inherited from a friend who didn't want it anymore. And I went, oh, wow, So I had it filled up with water and granola and chocolate bars and all this stuff, like I was on a survival trek or something, And so we go out on it was racetrack, basically. It was all concrete. So we go out there and we heard Sly and the Family Stone were the headliners the first night.
Okay.
So we go back. It's like, oh, wow, Well, then we go back the second night, and the headliner's Led Zeppelin. So
what? In Austin,
Zeppelin.
You saw? Was it in Dallas?
No,
or Austin?
Louisville, Texas.
Yeah, I mean, I live like 10 minutes from Louisville, Texas.
Well, it was the Louisville International Pop Festival, and the guys that put it on were the guys who did Woodstock a few months before that.
What?
Well, the same guys that did Woodstock did the Louisville Pop Festival. And the people who...
and Led Zeppelin was at it?
Yeah, it was their first tour to the United States. And we were Led Zeppelin fanatics. A friend of mine got the record, said these guys are going to make it big time.
That is so cool.
So we were like, okay, we're psyched, we all knew them and from the first record. And so we went and saw the show and saw a bunch of bands. And then it was after dark. And out on this concrete slab racetrack, and those guys were going, do you have any more of that granola? You have any more of those chocolate bars?
Right.
And I'm like pulling stuff out of my pack going, okay, sure, man. You were making fun of me before, but now it's not so not so strange, eh? You want some water? Yeah, sure. So we're standing there. And of course, when Led Zeppelin came on, we stood up and we're standing there. And one of the funniest things that happened, their set was kind of ragged, truthfully. And I was like, well, okay, but they were so good individually. John Bonham, I was like, whoa, And then at one point,
if since it was like one of their very first deals in the United States, if they were parlaying a Yardbirds deal, and it wasn't actually like it was it called Led Zeppelin then, or was it called the New Yardbirds?
It was definitely Led Zeppelin, and I'm heavy into the history of the Yardbirds. I saw the Yardbirds in Abilene by fluke working for the highway department. In 66, I've got a friend to take me, and Jeff Beck had talked I'm going blank for a second here. Let's see. It was
no worries.
Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page was invited by Jeff Beck to play bass. So when I went out to the airport with my friend, and they came down the stairs off the DC-3, and I saw, there's Jeff Beck, and then this guy who had really long hair came down, and I said, man, I don't know who that guy is. Well, when we went to the dance show, this bass player was mesmerizing, and I watched him half as much as I watched Jeff Beck. He was just fascinating, and he was bobbing and weaving around, and it was Jimmy Page. I didn't know who he was, until later.
Gosh.
It was a brief period of time that they played together. Then they got the bass player trained up. The other guitar player switched to bass, and they both played guitar. And then Beck left. But when we had gone to see Led Zeppelin at the Pop Festival, I was a little disappointed because their set was so ragged, but they were a fairly new band. And Jimmy Page wanted to call it the New Yardbirds, but because of contractual obligations, he wasn't able to. So they ended up naming the band Led Zeppelin and put out their first album, and then came over to the States, and Louisville was one of the first places they played. So they were the headliners. And so we were just frantic, that we were actually seeing them, and, it was great. And so we're watching them, and they're kind of jamming out a lot. And then at one point, Rick Cobb, our drummer buddy, just gets super animated, and he's jumping up and down, and he goes, he's got the bow. And we're like going, he's got the bow. And man, we were all so enthusiastic and animated and looking at each other. And then later we're like embarrassed for ourselves. And so we'd look at each other and go, he's got the bow. And go, yeah, sure, man.
Right.
We just got frenetic when Jimmy Page pulled out the bow to play guitar with the violin bow. And so we kidded ourselves forever after that one. It was like, if nothing else was going on, we'd just say, he's got the bow. And everybody.
That's hilarious. You guys are all musicians, all passionate about your art, and you're seeing something different, and it excited you.
Well, we got stuck in the traffic and spent forever getting back, but we went to this party, and these guys showed up that were promoting their new recording, and they were dressed up like they were going to a gig. It was in an apartment. So we went inside the apartment, and it was pretty jam-packed, and people were drinking beer and listening to music, and these guys were like selling their album, and we're like, we just saw Led Zeppelin, man. And so we went outside, and Henley plopped down in a like these lawn chairs they had out there, Chase Lounge type. And so we sat out there by the pool.
So Don Henley was with you the whole time, like when you were seeing Led Zeppelin and such?
Oh, yeah. We went the first day, and the headliner was Sly and the Family Stone, and they were great. And then we went the second day, and the headliner, the last act on the bill, was Led Zeppelin. So then we got.
So the 3 days you were hanging out with Don Henley.
Well, it was actually 2 days. We didn't go
2
one
days,
day.
pardon me.
And Richard Bowden showed up at that party, and we visited, but we were pretty blown out. And Richard Bowden had decided that he didn't want to go to the Pop Festival, so he showed up at the party and hung out with us. And we were sitting outside, basically just kind of winding down, but hung out there. But that's.
Hey, Chuck, do you remember, was Don Henley, was he talking about like how he was going to be world famous and stuff?
No, not at all. He was very reserved, actually very quiet, very direct, somewhat serious, almost overly serious, not a lot of chuckles, and seemed to be studying everything. Very, very much a look of intense study. So when he was watching us on stage, he was just standing there staring, And then when we were around him, he was very quiet and reserved and very intense.
Yeah.
But not animated at all. And he was a good drummer and a very powerful singer. So I'm sure what he did just about absolutely wore him out when they were doing gigs. And he was an exceptional singer and sounded just like he does, in his early career. When I heard him, He sounded just like he did all the way through his career.
Hey, man, it's been great having you on. Real quick, I actually I have a business, so I on my episodes I always promote what I do.
Yeah.
I am John the Sales Warrior Sansoni. I've been professionally selling successfully for 34 years. What can I teach you? How to prospect, present, follow up, and most importantly, how to close. I have a 3-day masterclass that includes inspiration, motivation, and the mental tools to succeed in business and sales. My course includes worksheets, audio, video, and can be taken in 30 action blocks. Also included, how to have greater confidence. My course should be $400. If you get it today, $99, and included my book for free. Once purchased, you'll get free monthly inspiration from me. Just go to saleswarriorinspire.com and order yours today. That's it. Back to the show.
Man, so awesome having you on, Chuck, man. This is just like, oh my God, all my friends that are musicians in Dallas and all my real good, like I have a lot of good friends that are really into music like myself. Some of them are musicians, some of them aren't. And there's such a huge music following in the Dallas area. We're like a great big family out here. We have a lot of tribute bands that we all go and watch. We have a lot of a lot of 80s and 70s and 60s bands. We actually got a Janis Joplin band in Dallas that we all go and watch.
Wow.
She doesn't play that often. Boy, does she have really good pipes. I mean, it's what I live for. It certainly work is not what I live for. But man, so awesome having you on. We're going to go ahead and sign off now. So from everybody at Schools Out 80s Comedy Story Time, I think we're going to change this to rock story time after having Chuck on.
Old school.
There you go. Chuck, you want to say bye to everybody?
Analog Man signing off.
All right. And
good night, y'all.
Dallas, Texas. Cheers, everybody.